A spinster at 37, Eleanor had surrendered to society's cruel judgment until one bold man with the power to change it all entered her life. But what made the Duke risk it all for her, and would society ever forgive him for it? Hello, lovely. If Eleanor's journey is already touching your heart, I'd be so grateful if you'd show your support with a like or subscribe. It truly helps me bring you more stories of resilience, romance, and triumph over adversity. And I'd absolutely love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. I read every single message, and knowing this story is reaching hearts across the globe always brings the biggest smile to my face. Now, let's continue with Eleanor's extraordinary tale. London, May 1851. Rain tapped gently against the windows of Whitmore House as Lady Eleanor Whitmore sat in her favorite armchair, embroidery hoop resting forgotten in her lap. At 37 years of age, with chestnut hair now streaked with silver at her temples, she had long since accepted the label society had placed upon her, spinster. The grand library of Whitmore House was Eleanor's sanctuary. Towering mahogany bookshelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, filled with volumes collected by generations of Whitmores. The room smelled of leather bindings, beeswax polish, and the lingering scent of lavender from sachets tucked between the cushions. Through the bay window, she watched raindrops transform the London streets into glistening ribbons of grey and amber as afternoon faded toward evening. Eleanor traced her finger along the delicate pattern she'd been stitching, a botanical study of roses, her particular passion. Unlike many ladies who took up embroidery merely to appear accomplished, Eleanor's interest in cultivating rare specimens had become genuine over the years. Her personal garden at the back of the Whitmore property showcased varieties she had nurtured with patient care, each one a small triumph against the passage of time. At her feet, Wellington, her brother's aging spaniel, released a contented sigh and shifted position, his greying muzzle resting on her slipper. In the reading chair across from her, Byron, a rather portly ginger cat, had claimed the seat hours ago and showed no inclination to surrender it. The cat's presence was testament to Eleanor's soft heart. He'd appeared at the kitchen door 2 winters past, half-starved and bedraggled, and she'd nursed him back to robust health despite the cook's protests about vermin. "You're both terribly spoiled," Eleanor murmured affectionately, though neither animal stirred at her voice. She set aside her embroidery and reached for the book on the side table, a treatise on botanical specimens of the British Isles. This was her life now. Quiet afternoons, loyal animals, the peaceful solitude of a well-ordered household. She had made her peace with it, mostly. The library door opened with a soft creak, and Mrs. Davies entered bearing a silver tea tray. The housekeeper had been with the Whitmore family for nearly 2 decades, arriving shortly after. Well, shortly after Eleanor's life had taken its irreversible turn. "I've brought your tea, Lady Eleanor," Mrs. Davies said warmly, setting the tray on the table beside her. "And cook has sent up those lemon biscuits you favor." "How thoughtful," Eleanor replied, genuine affection warming her voice. "Please extend my gratitude to her." Mrs. Davies smiled, her round face crinkling with pleasure. There was no pity in her expression, only the comfortable familiarity of long acquaintance. "Will you be dining with the family this evening, my lady? Or shall I have a tray sent to your rooms?" "I'll join them, thank you." Eleanor poured herself a cup of tea, the familiar ritual soothing. "Has Lord Whitmore returned from Parliament yet?" "Just arrived, my lady. Master Thomas is pestering him about their fishing expedition this weekend." Mrs. Davies chuckled. "That boy has been talking of nothing else for days." As the housekeeper departed, Eleanor sipped her tea and allowed herself a small smile. Her nephew Thomas, at 14, was all boundless energy and earnest enthusiasm. Her niece Charlotte, 16 and on the cusp of womanhood, possessed a romantic nature that both charmed and worried Eleanor. These children, motherless since Charlotte was 6, had become the center of Eleanor's world. She had poured into them all the maternal affection she would never bestow on children of her own. It was enough. It had to be enough. Her peaceful moment was interrupted by a purposeful knock. The library door opened to reveal her brother James, Lord Whitmore, still in his parliamentary attire. At 42, he carried the weight of his responsibilities with quiet dignity, though silver had begun to thread through his dark hair. "Ellie," he said, using the childhood name only he still employed. In his hand, he carried an embossed envelope bearing an elaborate wax seal. Eleanor recognized the Pemberton crest immediately, and her stomach tightened. James. He crossed the room and settled into the chair. Byron had finally vacated, the cat slinking away with an affronted flick of his tail. The Pemberton ball, 2 weeks hence. He placed the invitation on the table between them. "We've been invited." "How lovely," Eleanor said neutrally, not touching the envelope. "Ellie." James leaned forward, his expression gentle but firm. "As my hostess, your presence is expected at major social events. Charlotte's debut season is approaching. We must maintain our social connections." Eleanor set down her teacup with careful precision. "I attended the Ashford musicale last month. A musicale with 50 guests is hardly the same as the Pemberton ball. Half of London will be there." He paused, his voice softening. "You cannot hide forever, sister." "I am not hiding," Eleanor said quietly. "I am simply existing peacefully. There is a difference." "Is there?" James reached across and took her hand. "Ellie, you've done nothing wrong. You hold your head high and let them see that their whispers cannot touch you." "Ah, but they could." They did. Eleanor thought of the last ball she'd attended, the pitying glances from former friends, the cruel whispers barely concealed behind fans. The way conversations died when she approached. She thought of Lady Hartwell's remark, spoken just loud enough for her to overhear. Poor Eleanor Whitmore, still clinging to society's edges like a wilted flower. A wilted flower. At 37, that was what she had become in their eyes. As Eleanor held the invitation, a memory flashed unbidden across her mind, herself at 19, wearing white silk and orange blossoms, standing in the Ashworth garden. Lord Ashworth's face, twisted with fury as he shouted accusations, her mother's horrified expression, the whispers that had started that night and never, ever stopped. Eleanor pushed the memory away with practiced efficiency. 18 years of disciplining her thoughts had made her skilled at compartmentalizing pain. "Very well," she said at last, meeting her brother's hopeful gaze. "I shall attend." James's face brightened. "Truly." "You are correct. Charlotte's future requires it. I will not let my own circumstances affect her prospects." Eleanor managed a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Besides, it's only one evening. I've survived worse." The door burst open and Charlotte herself swept in, all youthful energy and unrestrained enthusiasm. "Papa, Aunt Eleanor, I've just heard the Pemberton ball." "Oh, we must begin planning immediately." Eleanor couldn't help but smile genuinely at her niece's excitement. Charlotte was blissfully unaware of the social cruelty her aunt faced, protected by youth and her father's careful shielding. To Charlotte, a ball was simply a magical evening of music, dancing, and romance. "Aunt Eleanor, you must let me help you choose your gown," Charlotte insisted, settling on the arm of Eleanor's chair. "I know you have that beautiful emerald silk. You've barely worn it. It would be perfect." "That gown is 5 years old, Charlotte. All the more reason to give it a proper debut, and we could add fresh flowers to your hair cream, roses from the garden, perhaps." Charlotte's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. "You'll be the most elegant lady there." The contrast between Charlotte's innocent excitement and Eleanor's weary resignation created an ache in Eleanor's chest. This girl, so full of hope and joy, had no idea what awaited her aunt at that ball. The stares, the whispers, the careful social maneuvering required to maintain dignity in the face of subtle cruelty, but Eleanor would endure it. For Charlotte's sake, for James's sake, she would smile and curtsy and pretend that 18 years of social exile hadn't carved away pieces of her soul. "Very well," Eleanor said softly, touching her niece's cheek. "The emerald silk it is." Charlotte squealed with delight and began chattering about hairstyles and jewelry, while James watched his sister with a mixture of gratitude and concern. Eleanor let the words wash over her, already steeling herself for the ordeal ahead. That evening, after dinner with the family and the pleasant chaos of Thomas's fishing stories and Charlotte's ball preparations, Eleanor stood at her bedroom window. Gas lamps flickered to life across London like earthbound stars, illuminating the city in pools of amber light. Rain had ceased, leaving the streets gleaming and fresh. She rested her forehead against the cool glass. 2 weeks until the Pemberton ball. 14 days to fortify herself against the whispers, the pitying glances, the cruel cuts disguised as concern. She had survived 18 years, as society's cautionary tale one more evening would not break her. Eleanor Whitmore had learned long ago that survival was its own form of victory. She would attend the ball with her head high and her dignity intact. She would smile graciously at those who whispered about her. She would demonstrate to Charlotte that a woman's worth was not determined by marriage or society's approval, and when it was over, she would return to her sanctuary, to her books, her gardens, her quiet life, and continue existing peacefully in the margins of a world that had decided she no longer belonged at its center. What Eleanor didn't know, as she watched London's lights flicker in the darkness, was that this ball would change everything. What she couldn't possibly anticipate was that the Duke of Ashbourne's ship had already docked in London harbour that very afternoon, carrying a man who would see her not as a wilted flower, but as the rarest bloom in all of England, one worth fighting the entire ton to claim. The Pemberton mansion blazed with light as the Whitmore carriage drew to a stop before its grand entrance. Every window glowed with candlelight, and music spilled from the open doors into the mild May evening. Carriages lined the circular drive, depositing London's elite in a steady stream of silk, jewels, and barely concealed ambition. Eleanor descended from the carriage with practiced grace, her emerald silk gown catching the lamplight. James offered his arm, while Charlotte practically vibrated with excitement beside them. "Oh, Aunt Eleanor, look at the flowers and the lights. Have you ever seen anything so magnificent?" Charlotte's eyes were wide with wonder. "It's very grand," Eleanor agreed, forcing warmth into her voice even as her stomach tightened with familiar dread. They joined the queue of guests ascending the marble steps. Eleanor kept her expression serene, her posture perfect armor fashioned from 18 years of practice. She could feel the stares beginning even before they entered, the slight turning of heads, the whispers behind fans. As they crossed the threshold into the entrance hall, Lady Hartwell's voice carried with deliberate clarity to her companion, though her words were clearly meant for Eleanor's ears. Poor Eleanor Whitmore, still clinging to society's edges like a wilted flower. Someone should tell her it's undignified at her age. Eleanor's fingers tightened imperceptibly on James's arm, but her expression never wavered. She had learned long ago that visible reaction only encouraged such cruelty. "Steady," James murmured, covering her hand with his own. They proceeded into the receiving line where Lady Pemberton, resplendent in purple satin and ostrich feathers, greeted them with the sort of effusive warmth reserved for those she considered socially useful. "Lord Whitmore, how delightful!" Lady Pemberton's smile was wide and brittle as porcelain. "And dear Charlotte, how you've grown. Quite the young lady now." Her gaze slid to Eleanor with notably less enthusiasm. "Lady Eleanor, how pleasant to see you." "Lady Pemberton, you've outdone yourself," Eleanor said smoothly, executing a perfect curtsy. "Your home is exquisite." They moved into the ballroom proper, and Charlotte gasped audibly. The room was indeed spectacular. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across polished floors, banks of hothouse flowers perfumed the air, and an orchestra played from a gilded alcove. Ladies in jewel-toned gowns swirled across the floor in the arms of gentlemen in severe black evening dress. Charlotte was immediately claimed by a group of young ladies her age, leaving Eleanor standing with James at the room's periphery. "Would you like to dance?" James asked gently. "Not just yet. You should circulate. Lord Melbourne is here, and you've been wanting to speak with him about the reform bill." Eleanor manufactured a smile. "I'm perfectly content to observe." James hesitated, clearly torn between duty and concern for his sister. "Go," Eleanor insisted. "I'm fine." She watched him make his way across the room, then endured 30 minutes of polite torture. Former acquaintances approached with false concern, their questions barbed with subtle cruelty. "How brave of you to still attend these events. You must find all these young girls exhausting. Have you considered retiring to the country? I hear it's so peaceful for ladies of a certain age." Eleanor smiled and deflected, smiled and endured, until she felt she might shatter from the effort of maintaining her composure. When the opportunity presented itself, she slipped through the French doors onto the terrace. The cool May air was a blessing against her flushed cheeks. The terrace was mercifully empty, and Eleanor moved to the stone balustrade, gripping it with both hands as she drew in deep, steadying breaths. Through the windows, she could see the ball continuing, young women twirling in their partners' arms, their faces bright with joy and possibility. She wasn't bitter. Truly, she wasn't. She felt no resentment toward those girls with their whole lives spread before them like unwritten pages. But she mourned, quietly and privately, for the girl she had once been. The girl in the white ball gown who had believed in happy endings, who had trusted that truth would prevail, who had never imagined that one terrible night could rewrite the entire trajectory of her existence. Eleanor was so lost in thought that she didn't notice the sudden hush that fell over the ballroom behind her. The music faltered mid-note, conversations died mid-sentence, and a ripple of movement passed through the crowd like wind through wheat. The Duke of Ashbourne had arrived. Alexander Hartfield, Duke of Ashbourne, stood in the ballroom entrance with the unconscious command of a man born to power. At 35, he possessed an austere handsomeness, dark hair, steel-grey eyes, and a strong jaw that suggested both determination and dangerous temper when roused. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with the relaxed confidence of someone who had never needed to prove his consequence. He had been absent from London for 3 years, travelling the continent, or so the rumours claimed, though no one knew precisely why he'd left or what had finally drawn him back. Every unmarried woman in the room and most of the married ones turned toward him like flowers seeking the sun. Mothers positioned their daughters with strategic precision. Lady Beatrice Caldwell, acknowledged as the season's reigning beauty, adjusted her décolletage and arranged herself prominently in his line of sight. Eleanor watched the spectacle through the French doors with detached amusement, the marriage mart in full predatory display. She almost pitied the Duke, though he seemed utterly unbothered by the attention, his expression remote and faintly bored. Then his eyes swept across the ballroom and stopped. On her. Eleanor froze, half hidden in the shadows of the terrace. Surely he was looking at something else, someone else. But no, his gaze was locked on hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Without acknowledging Lady Pemberton's effusive greeting, without so much as a glance at the sea of eager faces turned toward him, Alexander walked directly toward the terrace doors, toward her. Panic fluttered in Eleanor's chest. This made no sense. She began to step away, intending to slip around the corner of the terrace and avoid what was surely about to be an awkward misunderstanding. Lady Eleanor Whitmore, I believe. His voice stopped her deep, cultured, with an unexpected warmth that seemed at odds with his austere appearance. Eleanor turned slowly, her heart hammering. Up close, he was even more imposing, though not in a threatening way. There was intelligence in those grey eyes, and something else she couldn't quite identify. Your Grace. She sank into a curtsy, her mind racing. Had they met before? Surely she would remember. Forgive my presumption, Alexander said, but might I have the honour of an introduction? I am Alexander Hartfield, Duke of Ashbourne. Yes, Your Grace, Lady Eleanor Whitmore. She was grateful, her voice emerged steady, even as confusion clouded her thoughts. Would you honour me with the next waltz, Lady Eleanor? Eleanor's mind went blank. Surely she had misheard. I beg your pardon. A waltz, he repeated, and there was something almost amused in his expression. Would you dance with me? Your Grace, I think, perhaps you meant. She gestured vaguely toward the ballroom full of beautiful young women. I meant exactly what I said. His voice was quiet but firm. Lady Eleanor Whitmore, would you do me the very great honour of dancing with me? For one suspended moment, Eleanor could only stare at him. This had to be some sort of cruel jest, a wager perhaps. Dance with the spinster, make her believe. I have you, he said softly, and extended his arm. The words broke through her paralysis. Eleanor placed her hand on his arm, felt the solid warmth of him beneath the fine fabric of his coat, and allowed him to escort her back into the ballroom. The effect was instantaneous and electric. Every eye in the room fixed on them. Conversations ceased mid-word. Whispers erupted like wildfire, spreading from group to group with the speed of scandal. The Duke of Ashbourne was dancing with Eleanor Whitmore. Eleanor felt the weight of those stares like physical pressure, but Alexander seemed utterly unbothered. He led her onto the floor as the orchestra, recovering from their shock, struck up a waltz. His hand settled at her waist, his other hand clasping hers with gentle firmness, and they began to move. Eleanor had been an accomplished dancer in her youth, and some skills, it seemed, did not fade with time and disuse. Her body remembered the steps, the rhythm, even as her mind struggled to comprehend what was happening. You dance beautifully, Alexander said. Thank you, Your Grace. The formal response was automatic. Tell me, Lady Eleanor, what occupies your time? What are your interests? The question was so unexpected, so genuinely curious, that Eleanor answered truthfully, I manage my brother's household. I've developed quite a passion for cultivating roses. I have a small garden where I've successfully hybridized several varieties. And I tutor my nephew in botany and literature when his regular instructors despair of keeping his attention. Alexander's expression warmed with what appeared to be genuine interest. Hybrid roses? That requires considerable knowledge and patience. Which varieties have you been working with? And just like that, they were conversing, truly conversing, about grafting techniques and soil composition and the challenges of developing disease-resistant specimens. Eleanor found herself speaking with an animation she rarely displayed in public, and Alexander listened with focused attention, asking intelligent questions that demonstrated actual understanding of the subject. She almost forgot where she was, almost forgot the hundreds of eyes watching them, almost forgot that dukes did not dance with aging spinsters and engage them in serious botanical discourse. Then her foot caught slightly on her hem nerves, not clumsiness, and she stumbled. Alexander's hand at her waist tightened immediately, steadying her, drawing her fractionally closer. "I have you," he murmured, and there was something in his voice that made Eleanor's breath catch. The waltz ended too soon. Alexander escorted her from the floor toward the refreshment table, his hand never leaving the small of her back, a possessive touch that did not go unnoticed by the assembled crowd. Lady Pemberton materialized beside them, her smile strained. "Your Grace, surely you meant to dance with someone more suitable? Perhaps Lady Beatrice is free, or Lady Caroline. Both such accomplished young ladies." Alexander turned to face her, and the temperature seemed to drop several degrees. "I have danced with the only suitable woman in this room," he said, his voice quiet but carrying clearly in the sudden silence that surrounded them. "Lady Eleanor has more grace and intelligence than the rest of your guests combined." The shockwave rippled outward, mouths fell open, fans stilled mid-flutter. Even the orchestra seemed to miss a note. Dukes did not champion spinsters. Dukes did not publicly cut society hostesses. This simply did not happen. Eleanor felt the color drain from her face. This was too much, too public, too impossible to understand. "Excuse me," she managed, and fled. She made it to the ladies' retiring room before her knees went weak. A moment later, James burst in. "Propriety be damned. Ellie, what in God's name just happened?" "I don't know," she whispered, sinking onto a velvet settee. "James, I don't know. I've never met him before. I can't imagine why he would. He defended you, publicly, against Lady Pemberton herself." "I know." Eleanor pressed her hands to her burning cheeks. "It makes no sense." The ride home was surreal. Charlotte chattered endlessly about the Duke's handsomeness, the romance of it all, how it was just like a fairy tale. Eleanor sat in silence, replaying every moment, searching for the rational explanation that must exist. When they arrived at Whitmore House, Eleanor went directly to her room. She stood at her bedroom window, still in her emerald gown, trying to process the evening's inexplicable events. Below, a lone rider on a magnificent black horse passed through the pool of lamplight. The rider looked up, directly at her lit window, and Eleanor's breath caught. Even from this distance, even in the dim light, she recognized him. Alexander sat motionless for a long moment, his gaze locked on her window. Then he touched his hand to his heart in a gesture that might have been a salute or a promise, and rode on into the darkness. Eleanor pressed her hand to the glass, her heart racing. The Duke of Ashbourne was a mystery Eleanor hadn't anticipated, and one she wasn't certain she wanted to solve. Eleanor woke early the morning after the Pemberton ball, her mind still churning with the inexplicable events of the previous evening. She had slept poorly, dreams fragmenting into confused images of grey eyes and waltz music and whispered speculation. She dressed in a simple morning gown of pale blue muslin and descended to the breakfast room, expecting the familiar comfort of routine. James sat behind his newspaper. Thomas was already pestering the footman about the promised fishing expedition. And Charlotte, "Aunt Eleanor," Charlotte practically vibrated with suppressed excitement. "Something's arrived for you." Mrs. Davies entered at that precise moment, carrying a crystal vase containing a single, perfect white rose. The bloom was exquisite, just unfurling, its petals like cream silk in the morning light. "This arrived for you not a quarter-hour ago, Lady Eleanor," the housekeeper said, setting the vase on the table with a knowing smile. Eleanor's hand trembled slightly as she reached for the small card tucked among the greenery. The heavy cream cardstock bore only one thing, the Ashbourne ducal crest embossed in silver. No message, nor explanation. "The Duke of Ashbourne sent you a flower." Charlotte clasped her hands together like a heroine in a novel. "How romantic." James lowered his newspaper, his expression a mixture of pleasure and concern. "Ellie, what are the Duke's intentions, do you suppose?" "I have no idea." Eleanor set down the card carefully, as if it might burn her fingers. "It's likely a courtesy. Perhaps an apology for drawing such attention to me last night. An apology would come with a note, James observed. Eleanor studied the rose, its perfection somehow unsettling. It's a single flower, James. I'm certain it means nothing beyond basic politeness. But when she retired to her sitting room later that morning, she found herself unable to stop glancing at the white rose, now relocated to her writing desk. Its faint perfume seemed to fill the entire room. The next morning, another white rose arrived. Same crystal vase, same cream cardstock bearing the Ashbourne crest, same absence of any written message. "Another one," Charlotte announced, dancing into Eleanor's sitting room. "Oh, Aunt Eleanor, this is so terribly romantic. The Duke is courting you." "Charlotte, you mustn't build fairy tales from a few flowers," Eleanor cautioned, though her heart beat faster as she touched the perfect petals. "This is likely some passing whim. For 2 days in a row," Charlotte's eyes sparkled with mischief. "Aunt Eleanor, he's declaring his intentions." On the third morning, Mrs. Davies arrived with the now familiar crystal vase and its solitary occupant. The housekeeper's expression was carefully neutral, but Eleanor could see the curiosity dancing in her eyes. "Another rose, my lady." "So I see." Eleanor accepted it with as much composure as she could muster. "If I may be so bold, Lady Eleanor," Mrs. Davies said, "the entire household staff is quite interested in these daily deliveries. Cook says she's never seen such devotion from a gentleman, not in all her years." After Mrs. Davies departed, Eleanor sank into her chair and stared at the 3 roses, now arranged together on her mantelpiece. What was Alexander doing? What did he want? On the 5th day, the 5th rose, Eleanor received her first social caller in months. Lady Pemberton arrived in a flurry of peacock feathers and artificial warmth, her smile so wide it looked painful. "Dear Lady Eleanor, how delightful to find you at home. I've been meaning to call. We had such a lovely conversation at my ball, did we not?" They had exchanged perhaps 3 sentences, and one of those had been Lady Pemberton's thinly veiled insult about suitable dance partners. Eleanor served tea with perfect courtesy, while Lady Pemberton circled her true purpose like a cat stalking a mouse. "The Duke of Ashbourne," Lady Pemberton finally said, abandoning subtlety. "Such a distinguished gentleman. I understand he's been corresponding with you?" "He sent flowers," Eleanor said carefully. "We have not corresponded." "But surely you have some prior connection? Some shared history?" "None whatsoever. I had never met His Grace before your ball." Lady Pemberton's eyes gleamed with frustrated curiosity. "How extraordinary. One wonders what could have inspired such marked attention." "I wonder the same thing, Lady Pemberton." After her guest departed, no more enlightened than when she'd arrived, Eleanor stood at her window and watched the woman's carriage roll away. So it had begun. The speculation, the gossip, the relentless curiosity of society. "They're saying he's courting you," Charlotte announced that evening at dinner, having apparently been listening to the servants' gossip. "All of London is talking about the Duke's white roses." "Charlotte, that's enough," James said gently. But Charlotte was not to be silenced. "It's the most romantic thing I've ever heard. A duke so captivated by your intelligence and grace that he can't help but declare his admiration." "Charlotte," Eleanor set down her fork, "listen to me carefully. Men like the Duke of Ashbourne do not court women like me. I am 37 years old. I have no fortune, no connections of value, and a scandal in my past that destroyed any marriageability I might once have possessed. This, whatever this is, will pass." Even as she said the words, a small, traitorous hope unfurled in her chest. Dangerous, unwelcome, but undeniably there. The gossip spread like wildfire through London's drawing rooms. The Duke of Ashbourne was fixated on Eleanor Whitmore. But why? The theories multiplied daily. Perhaps the Duke had known her late father, but Eleanor confirmed they had never met. Perhaps he was secretly ruined financially and needed Lord Whitmore's political influence absurd, as the Ashbournes possessed one of the largest fortunes in England. Perhaps it was all an elaborate wager, some cruel joke played by bored aristocrats. That last theory cut Eleanor most deeply. She had been the subject of cruel jokes before. On the 8th day, Eleanor composed a carefully worded note. "Your Grace, I am sensible of the honor you do me with your thoughtful gifts. However, I must request that you cease these attentions. The speculation they inspire is uncomfortable for both of us. With gratitude and respect, Lady Eleanor Whitmore." She sent it by footman to Ashbourne House and felt a curious mixture of relief and regret. The next morning, 2 white roses arrived. The card read, in bold, masculine handwriting, "I do not cease easily." Eleanor stared at the note, frustration and something dangerously like joy warring in her chest. He was impossible, stubborn, completely disregarding her clearly stated wishes. She could not control this situation, and the loss of control terrified her. For 18 years, she had maintained careful boundaries, protected herself from hope and disappointment. Now those boundaries were crumbling, and she felt exposed, vulnerable in ways she had sworn never to be again. 3 days later, seeking solitude and clarity, Eleanor took Wellington for a walk in Hyde Park. The morning was grey and cool, threatening rain, perfect for avoiding the fashionable crowds who would not venture out in such weather. She was contemplating the rose beds near the Serpentine when the sound of hoofbeats made her turn. Alexander Hartfield sat astride a magnificent black stallion, looking like something from a romantic painting. He dismounted with fluid grace and approached her, leading his horse. Lady Eleanor, what a fortunate coincidence. Wellington, traitor that he was, trotted over to investigate the Duke with tail-wagging enthusiasm. Your Grace. Eleanor's heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. I received your note. And I received yours. He smiled slightly. I thought my response was clear. It was. Eleanor drew a breath, decided on directness. Your Grace, Alexander, why are you doing this? The flowers, the attention, last night's public defense of me at the Pemberton ball. What do you want from me? He was quiet for a moment, his grey eyes studying her face. I want to know you, he said finally. I have spent 3 years travelling the world. Paris, Rome, Vienna, Constantinople. I've met diplomats and artists, scholars and soldiers, and in one evening, at a tedious ball I attended only out of obligation, you intrigued me more than anyone I've encountered in all my travels. Eleanor shook her head. I don't believe you. I'm too old, too. Tainted by scandal. Surely you can't be serious. Why not? Because dukes don't court spinsters. The words burst out with more emotion than she'd intended. Because there are dozens of beautiful young women who would marry you in an instant. Because this makes no sense. It makes perfect sense to me. Alexander took a step closer, his voice gentle. I saw you on that terrace, alone but not lonely, resigned but not defeated. You stood there with such quiet dignity, such grace in the face of casual cruelty. I recognized a kindred spirit. A kindred spirit? Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. I fled London 3 years ago, Alexander said quietly, because I could no longer bear the suffocating expectations, the pressure to marry strategically, the endless parade of debutantes who saw only my title and fortune, shallow conversations about nothing of consequence, women who would tell me whatever they thought I wanted to hear. He paused. And then I met you. You, who spoke passionately about hybrid roses and soil composition. You, who clearly didn't want my attention and said so. You, who have survived something that would have broken others and emerged with your dignity intact. Eleanor's throat tightened. She wanted desperately to believe him, but fear held her back. You don't know what you're saying. I was once society's darling, Your Grace, and then scandal destroyed everything. I am not the woman you imagine me to be. I am not interested in society's opinion, Alexander said firmly. I'm interested in yours, in who you are, not who they say you were. They stood in silence for a long moment, the grey morning light soft around them. Wellington had settled at their feet, content. May I call on you? Alexander asked. Formally, with your brother present, entirely proper? Eleanor knew she should refuse, should protect herself from the inevitable pain when this impossible situation collapsed. But looking into his eyes, seeing something that looked remarkably like hope reflected there. Yes, she whispered, you may call. His smile transformed his austere features into something approaching beautiful. Across London, in an elegantly appointed bedroom in Mayfair, Lady Beatrice Caldwell sat at her dressing table and read the society pages with mounting fury. The Duke of Ashbourne continues his unprecedented courtship of Lady Eleanor Whitmore, sending daily tokens of his esteem. Beatrice crumpled the paper in her fist. This was impossible, intolerable. She was the acknowledged beauty of the season, destined to be a duchess. And Alexander was wasting his attention on a washed-up spinster with a sordid past? She would not allow it. Molly, she called to her lady's maid, I need you to run an errand, a discreet errand. The maid appeared, curious and cautious. Yes, my lady? Beatrice smoothed the news sheet, her mind already racing through possibilities. Eleanor Whitmore had survived one scandal, but could she survive two? "I need you to find someone for me," Beatrice said slowly. "Someone who can forge handwriting. Someone very, very good at it. Because if the Duke of Ashbourne wouldn't choose her willingly, Beatrice would ensure that Eleanor Whitmore was eliminated as competition." The pattern established itself with surprising ease over the following weeks. 3 times each week, precisely at the proper calling hours, the Duke of Ashbourne's carriage would draw up before Whitmore House. Alexander would be announced, admitted to the drawing room where James sat as chaperone, and for the next hour, Eleanor would discover what it meant to be courted by a man of intelligence and genuine interest. Their first formal call had been stilted, both of them conscious of James's presence and the weight of expectation. But by the second visit, they had fallen into conversation about a book Eleanor had mentioned, a treatise on Gothic architecture Alexander had read during his time in France. "The flying buttresses at Notre Dame are extraordinary," Alexander said, leaning forward in his chair with an enthusiasm that softened his austere features. "The way they distribute the weight of the roof while creating those soaring interior spaces, it's engineering as artistry." "I've only seen illustrations," Eleanor admitted, "but the concept fascinates me, using external support to create internal freedom. There's almost a philosophical dimension to it." Alexander's eyes lit up. "Precisely. The constraints that enable liberation. Not so different from the structure a garden framework provides for roses to climb, perhaps." And they were off, drawing connections between architecture and botany, form and function, the ways humans imposed order on the natural world while simultaneously celebrating its beauty. James, reading his newspaper in the corner, hid a smile. His sister was arguing passionately about the aesthetic merits of different arch styles, her face animated in a way he hadn't seen in years. By the third week, their conversations ranged across topics Eleanor had never discussed with anyone outside her family. They debated the reform bill currently before Parliament, Eleanor surprising Alexander with her nuanced understanding of the political considerations at play. "You're better informed than half the lords I sit with," Alexander said with genuine admiration. "I read the papers thoroughly," Eleanor replied, "and James discusses his work at dinner. One develops opinions. One develops intelligent, well-reasoned opinions," Alexander corrected. "There's a difference." It was so unlike his interactions with debutantes, who simpered and agreed with everything he said, or offered rehearsed opinions clearly fed to them by ambitious mothers. Eleanor challenged him, questioned his assumptions, forced him to defend his positions. It was exhilarating. When Alexander began insisting on public walks in Hyde Park, Eleanor was less enthusiastic. "Your Grace Alexander, people will talk," she protested. "Let them talk," he said mildly, offering his arm. "I'm not ashamed to be seen with you. Why should you be ashamed to be seen with me?" The first promenade was an exercise in endurance. They walked the fashionable path along the Serpentine, while every passing acquaintance stared. Some nodded politely, others whispered behind their hands. A group of society matrons, including Lady Hartwell, deliberately turned their backs as Eleanor and Alexander approached. Alexander stopped walking. "Lady Hartwell," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the path. "How unfortunate that your eyesight seems to be failing. You appeared not to notice, Lady Eleanor." Lady Hartwell turned, her face flushing. "Your Grace, I shall have to inform the Ladies' Charitable Committee that I'm withdrawing my family's annual patronage," Alexander continued pleasantly. "I cannot support organizations led by women who lack basic courtesy. The Ashbourne patronage was worth several £1,000s annually." Lady Hartwell's face went white. "Your Grace, surely there's no need." "There's every need," Alexander said coldly. "Good day, madam." He guided Eleanor away, his hand firm at her elbow. She was trembling. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. "Yes, I did." His voice was gentle now. "Eleanor, I will not stand by while people treat you with cruelty. You deserve better." "I'm used to it," she said quietly. "I've learned to endure." "You shouldn't have to endure." He stopped, turned to face her. "You should be celebrated, honored, treated with the respect you've earned through your grace and strength." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. No one had fought for her like this in 18 years. As the courtship progressed, Alexander began to notice small things. The way Eleanor took her tea weak, with honey but no cream. How she favored her left ankle slightly on rainy days, an old injury she dismissed when he asked. Her habit of tucking her hair behind her ear when she was concentrating deeply on something. The way Byron the cat would materialize whenever she sat down, claiming her lap with proprietary insistence. He noticed everything because he couldn't stop watching her, couldn't stop wanting to know every detail, every quirk, every piece of the puzzle that was Eleanor Whitmore. "I would very much like to see your rose garden," he said one afternoon. "You speak of it so often, I'm curious to see the results of your work." Eleanor's face brightened with pleasure. "Truly, it's nothing grand, but I am rather proud of what I've accomplished." She led him through the house to the back garden, James trailing behind with an indulgent smile. The garden was indeed modest compared to the great estates Alexander had visited, but it was exquisitely maintained. Roses in various stages of bloom clustered along trellises and filled carefully tended beds. "This is my greatest success," Eleanor said, stopping before a bush covered in blooms of the most delicate blush pink. A hybrid between the Alba and the damask rose. It took 4 years to develop a stable variety, but look, the petals have the Alba's pure color, but the damask's rich fragrance. She cupped a bloom gently, inhaling its scent, and her face transformed with pure joy. Alexander watched her explain the grafting technique she'd used, the careful selection of parent plants, the patience required to nurture each experimental cutting. She spoke with the passion of a true scholar, her intelligence and dedication evident in every word. And he realized, standing in that modest garden watching her face illuminate with enthusiasm, that he was falling in love with her. Not falling, had fallen, thus lost entirely. The realization should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Charlotte's debut ball loomed on the calendar, and Eleanor grew increasingly anxious. "I worry that my presence will overshadow her evening," she confessed to Alexander during one of his calls. "The whispers, the speculation about us, Charlotte should be the center of attention, not the subject of gossip by association." "Then we ensure she receives the attention she deserves," Alexander said firmly. "Eleanor, I would like to offer Ashbourne House as the venue for Charlotte's debut." Eleanor's eyes widened. "Your Grace, that's far too generous." "It's practical," he corrected. "Ashbourne House is one of London's finest venues. A debut ball there would guarantee attendance from the highest echelons of society and establish Charlotte's status from the outset. More importantly, it would demonstrate my support for your family, publicly." James, who had been listening from his chair, set down his newspaper. "Your Grace, we could not possibly impose. It's not an imposition, it's a privilege." Alexander met James's eyes steadily. "I care deeply for your sister, Lord Whitmore. Supporting your daughter is both my honor and my pleasure." James studied the Duke for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then we accept, with gratitude. And perhaps, Your Grace, you might call me James." "Alexander," the Duke replied with a slight smile. The two men understood each other. Permission had been granted, blessing bestowed. The courtship could continue with the family's full support. A week later, Alexander invited Eleanor to the opera, a public evening event that would be noticed and remarked upon by all of society. Eleanor spent an entire afternoon selecting her dress with Charlotte's enthusiastic assistance. They chose midnight blue silk, a new gown purchased specifically for the occasion. The color brought out the hazel of Eleanor's eyes and complemented her complexion beautifully. She wore her mother's sapphire earrings, a bittersweet choice that Charlotte noticed. "They look beautiful on you, Aunt Eleanor," the girl said softly. "Your grandmother would have approved of this gown, I think," Eleanor replied, touching the earrings gently. "If not of much else in my life." At the opera house, Alexander was attentive without being ostentatious. He kept his hand at the small of her back as they navigated the crowded lobby, a possessive touch that did not go unnoticed. Eleanor could feel the weight of every stare, hear the whispers that followed in their wake. They settled into the Ashbourne box, prominently positioned and luxuriously appointed, just as the curtain rose on Verdi's Rigoletto. Eleanor lost herself in the music. In the tragic story of love and betrayal unfolding on stage, Alexander watched her more than the opera, captivated by the play of emotion across her face. During intermission, they descended to the lobby for refreshments. Eleanor was reaching for a glass of champagne when Lady Hartwell's voice cut through the surrounding conversation. "How charitable of the Duke to escort poor Eleanor," she said to her companion, loud enough to carry. "Like caring for a wounded bird. So noble of him." The conversations around them died. Eleanor's hand froze halfway to the glass, her face draining of color. Alexander turned slowly to face Lady Hartwell, his expression glacial. "Lady Eleanor is no wounded bird," he said. his voice quiet but carrying with absolute clarity. "She is a woman of remarkable strength, intelligence, and grace. Something you, Lady Hartwell, could not possibly comprehend." He took Eleanor's arm and guided her away, leaving Lady Hartwell standing in humiliated silence as whispers erupted around her. In the carriage ride home, Eleanor was quiet. Alexander sat across from her, giving her space but watching her carefully. "Eleanor," he said finally, "may I ask you something?" She looked up, her eyes guarded. "Of course. What happened?" he asked gently. 18 years ago. You mentioned a scandal, but you've never told me the details. I would like to understand, not out of curiosity, but because I care for you, because what hurt you matters to me." Eleanor was silent for so long Alexander thought she wouldn't answer. Then, quietly, she began to speak. "I was 19, still naive enough to believe that innocence was its own protection." Her voice was distant, lost in memory. "There was a garden party at the Ashworth estate. Lord Ashworth, a married man nearly twice my age, cornered me in the rose garden. He attempted to force himself on me. I fought him off and fled." Alexander's hands clenched into fists, fury rising hot in his chest. "He told everyone I had tried to seduce him," Eleanor continued, her voice steady now, practiced. "That I was a scheming girl who had lured him into a compromising situation. His wife believed him. Society believed him. And my mother," her voice broke slightly, "my mother believed him, over me, her own daughter, Eleanor. She died 5 years ago," Eleanor said, without ever apologizing, without ever acknowledging that she'd been wrong. "The scandal destroyed any prospect of marriage, of course. No respectable man would have me. I became what you see now, a cautionary tale, society's spinster, the wilted flower everyone pities and no one wants." Alexander crossed to sit beside her, taking her hands in his. "You are none of those things. You are brave and brilliant and beautiful, and those who hurt you, who failed you, they were wrong. So completely, inexcusably wrong. Alexander, I will restore your reputation," he said fiercely. "I will make society see you as I see you. I swear it." Eleanor shook her head, tears sliding down her cheeks. "You can't fight 18 years of whispers. You'll only damage your own standing." "I don't care about my standing," he said. "I care about you." They arrived at Whitmore House too soon. Alexander helped Eleanor from the carriage and escorted her to the door. They lingered in the lamplight, neither wanting the evening to end. Alexander reached up, gently tucking a strand of hair behind Eleanor's ear. His hand lingered at her jaw, his thumb brushing her cheek. Eleanor's breath caught, her eyes locked on his. He leaned closer, and she could feel the warmth of him, smell the subtle scent of his cologne. The door opened. James stood in the doorway, backlit by the entrance hall. "Eleanor? Is everything all right?" Alexander stepped back immediately, the spell broken. "Lord Whitmore, I was just seeing your sister safely home." "Of course. Thank you, Your Grace." James's eyes twinkled with knowing amusement. "Eleanor, you should come in. It's getting late." Eleanor touched her cheek where Alexander's hand had rested, murmured good night, and fled inside. In her room, she stood before her mirror and pressed her fingers to her jaw, still feeling the ghost of his touch. She was falling in love, had fallen in love, and the terror of it was overwhelming. Because love meant vulnerability, meant risking the kind of pain she'd sworn never to endure again. But oh, what if this time was different? What if Alexander truly meant everything he said? Across London, in a dim tavern near the docks, Lady Beatrice Caldwell sat across from a man whose weathered hands marked him as a skilled craftsman. "Can you do it?" she asked, sliding a sample of Eleanor's handwriting across the scarred table, a document stolen from a charitable committee Eleanor had briefly served on years ago. The forger studied the writing carefully, his eyes sharp despite the poor light. "I, a clean hand, well-educated. I can match it. And the paper, the ink, everything must be authentic. I know my business, milady." He named his price. Beatrice didn't flinch. She counted out the coins and added more. "I need 6 letters. Correspondence between this woman and the late Duke of Ashbourne, the current Duke's uncle. They must suggest an intimate relationship, an ongoing affair. Shouldn't be difficult." The forger pocketed the coins. "When do you need them?" "1 week," Beatrice said. "They must be ready in 1 week." The timing was perfect. Charlotte Whitmore's debut ball was scheduled for 8 days hence, to be held at Ashbourne House itself. The letters would surface just before the ball, too late for Eleanor to mount any defense, too public for the scandal to be contained. Beatrice smiled into her wineglass as the forger departed with his commission. In 1 week, Eleanor Whitmore would be ruined beyond even the Duke's ability to save her. Alexander would see the spinster for what she truly was, a desperate, grasping woman who had pursued his family before. And when Eleanor was destroyed, Alexander would finally turn to where he belonged, to Beatrice, beautiful and young and unsullied by scandal. Everything was falling into place. Ashbourne House had been transformed into a fairyland. Eleanor walked through the grand ballroom 3 days before Charlotte's debut, marveling at the changes. Crystal chandeliers had been polished until they sparkled like captured starlight. The floors gleamed like mirrors. Hothouse flowers filled every alcove, their perfume sweet and heady in the air, and everywhere were white roses. They cascaded from garlands along the walls, filled enormous vases on every table, twined through the balustrade of the musicians' gallery. Hundreds upon hundreds of perfect white blooms, a private tribute only she and Alexander would truly understand. "Do you approve?" Alexander's voice came from behind her. Eleanor turned, her heart catching as it always did when she saw him. "It's breathtaking. Charlotte will be overwhelmed." "I didn't do it for Charlotte." He crossed to her, taking her hand in his. They were alone. James had stepped away to confer with the wine steward. "Eleanor, after the ball, I intend to speak to your brother, formally." Her breath stopped. "Alexander, my intentions are marriage," he said quietly, his grey eyes intense on hers. "I'm going to ask for your hand. I wanted you to know, to prepare yourself for the question I'll pose." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "You're certain? Even with everything in my past?" "Especially because of everything in your past," he said fiercely. "You've survived what would have destroyed others. You're brave and brilliant, and everything I never dared hope to find. Eleanor Whitmore, I love you." The words hung in the air between them, precious and terrifying. "I love you too," she whispered. "I'm terrified of how much I love you." He smiled, lifting her hand to kiss her knuckles. "Then be terrified together with me. Say yes when I ask." Eleanor laughed, a sound caught between joy and tears. She was happier than she'd been in 18 years, and that happiness terrified her more than anything else, because happiness had always been snatched away just when she dared to reach for it. "Don't look so frightened," Alexander murmured. "This time will be different, I promise you." If only she could believe that promises held any power against fate. The morning of Charlotte's debut ball dawned bright and clear, a perfect May day. Eleanor woke early, her mind already cataloguing the 1,000 details that still needed attention. Flowers to be checked, place cards to be verified, the supper menu to be confirmed one final time. She was reviewing the guest list in the morning room when the butler appeared, his face grave. "Lady Eleanor, Lord Whitmore has just arrived. He asks that you attend him in the study immediately." Something in the man's tone made Eleanor's stomach drop. She set aside the guest list with hands that had begun to tremble and followed him to James's study. Her brother stood at the window, his back to the door. In his hands, he clutched a sheaf of papers. "James, what's happened?" He turned, and Eleanor's breath caught at the devastation in his face. Without a word, he held out the papers. They were letters, 6 of them, written in a hand that looked remarkably, horrifyingly like her own. "My darling Duke, last night's stolen hours in your arms were heaven itself. How cruel that we must hide this love, that society's constraints keep us apart. But I would endure any scandal, any disgrace, for one more taste of your kiss." Eleanor's vision blurred. The words swam before her eyes, intimate and explicit, describing an affair that had never existed with a man she'd barely known. "These are addressed to your late uncle," James said, his voice hoarse. "To the late Duke of Ashbourne. They're dated over a 5-year period, ending just before his death." "I didn't write these." Eleanor's voice emerged as a whisper. "James, I swear to you, I never." "I know." He crossed to her, gripping her shoulders. "I know you didn't. But Ellie, they arrived at my club this morning. By noon, copies had been delivered to every major household in London. The scandal sheets will have them by evening." Eleanor sank into a chair, the letters falling from nerveless fingers. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Not when she'd finally dared to hope. "I met the late Duke perhaps 3 times, she said numbly. "Always at public functions, always in full view of dozens of witnesses. This is a fabrication, a forgery. I believe you, but society won't." James knelt before her chair. "The handwriting is nearly perfect, Ellie. Whoever did this was very, very skilled. And the timing, the ball. Eleanor's eyes widened with horror. Charlotte's debut is tonight. We could cancel. No. Eleanor stood abruptly, her mind racing despite the shock. If we cancel, Charlotte's reputation is ruined before she's even debuted. Society will assume we're fleeing in disgrace, that the letters prove my guilt. But if we proceed, I leave. The words came with terrible clarity. I'll retreat to the country estate tonight. You and Charlotte will attend the ball. You'll make my excuses illness, perhaps, and you'll weather this as best you can. Ellie, I won't let you run. I'm not running. I'm protecting Charlotte. Eleanor's voice hardened with determination. This scandal, this lie will not destroy her future. I won't allow it. She walked to the door, then paused. Have the servants begin packing my trunks. I'll leave after dark, before the ball begins. In her room, Eleanor moved through the motions of preparation mechanically. She directed which gowns to pack, which books, which personal items. The maid worked silently, tears streaming down her face. But Eleanor found she couldn't cry. The shock had numbed her too completely. This was a nightmare, a carefully orchestrated destruction. But who hated her enough to do this? Who had access to her handwriting, the skill to forge it so perfectly? The questions circled endlessly, unanswerable. At Ashbourne House, Alexander stood in the ballroom, overseeing the final preparations, when his secretary appeared, his face ashen. Your Grace, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this immediately. The scandal sheet was still damp from the press. Alexander read the headline and felt the world tilt beneath his feet. Shocking letters reveal Lady E. W. his intimate affair with late Duke. He scanned the excerpts printed below, fury rising hot and fierce in his chest. This was a lie, an obvious, malicious lie. His uncle had been devoted to his wife until her death. The man had spoken of little else in his final years but his grief at losing her. The idea that he'd conducted an affair with Eleanor or anyone was absurd. Summon my solicitor, Alexander snapped, and find me the best handwriting expert in London. I want them here within the hour. Your Grace, the ball. Damn the ball! Alexander crumpled the scandal sheet in his fist. Someone has deliberately fabricated evidence to destroy Lady Eleanor's reputation. I will not allow it. His man of affairs arrived first, followed quickly by the solicitor and a gentleman who specialized in document authentication. Alexander spread the letters across his desk. Copies had been delivered to Ashbourne House as well, and watched the expert examine them with a magnifying glass. Well? Alexander demanded. Masterful work, the expert said slowly. The hand is nearly perfect, but there are inconsistencies. The ink formulation is wrong for the dates, given this particular mixture wasn't available until 2 years ago. And this paper, he held one letter to the light. The watermark dates from last year. These letters could not possibly have been written when they claim. Can you prove it? In court? Absolutely. But Your Grace, the ball is in 5 hours. Society has already seen these letters. Even if we prove them false eventually, the damage is done. Alexander's jaw clenched. Ready your evidence. We'll need it. He turned to his secretary. Order my horse. I'm going to Whitmore House. Alexander didn't wait to be announced. He strode past the protesting butler and found James in the entrance hall. Where is she? Your Grace, Eleanor cannot receive. Where is she? James's shoulders sagged. The library. Alexander found Eleanor surrounded by half-packed trunks, directing servants with mechanical precision. Her hair had come loose from its pins, her dress was rumpled, and her eyes were red-rimmed from crying. She looked up as he entered, and her composure cracked. You shouldn't be here. Where else would I be? He dismissed the servants with a gesture, closed the door, and crossed to her. Eleanor, you have to distance yourself from me. The words tumbled out desperately. Alexander, your association with me will destroy your standing. Society will. Do you truly think I care about standing? He gripped her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. About their opinions? About any of it? Eleanor, I love you. That hasn't changed. That will never change. Eleanor froze, tears sliding down her cheeks. Alexander, you can't. No one has said those words to me in 18 years. Then they were all fools. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as she shook. I will prove these letters false. I will expose whoever did this. I swear it to you. There isn't time, she whispered against his chest. The ball is tonight. Charlotte, come to the ball with me. She pulled back, staring at him as if he'd lost his mind. "I can't. My presence would ruin Charlotte's debut." "Then don't come to the ball," Alexander said, his mind racing. "But don't flee London either. Stay at Ashbourne House, as my guest, under my protection." "That's highly irregular." "I don't care." He cupped her face in his hands. "Eleanor, I will not let you run. I will not let them destroy you. Trust me, please." Eleanor looked into his eyes and saw absolute certainty. He meant every word. "All right," she whispered. "I'll stay." James agreed to the arrangement, though his face was tight with worry. Eleanor was transferred to Ashbourne House in a closed carriage, but of course, society saw. Servants talked. By evening, every drawing room in London buzzed with speculation about Lady Eleanor taking refuge in the Duke's own home. Eleanor sat alone in Alexander's library while, in the ballroom, 3 floors above, Charlotte's debut ball began. She could hear the faint strains of music, the muffled sound of hundreds of voices. She imagined Charlotte in her white debut gown, hoped desperately that her niece's evening wouldn't be ruined by association with her scandalous aunt. The library door opened. Alexander stood on the threshold, magnificent in formal evening dress. "I thought you were opening the ball," Eleanor said. "I am, but I wanted to see you first." He crossed to her, kissed her forehead gently. "Stay here. No matter what you hear, stay here. Trust me." Then he was gone, leaving Eleanor alone with her fears. The Ashbourne ballroom glittered with the cream of London society. Despite the scandal, or perhaps because of it, no one had dared refuse the Duke's invitation. They came to gawk, to whisper, to witness what promised to be a spectacular social disaster. Charlotte stood with James near the refreshment table, her young face pale but determined. Lady Beatrice Caldwell positioned herself prominently near the entrance, her beauty on full display, a small smile playing at her lips. Alexander entered alone. The orchestra fell silent. Hundreds of faces turned toward him. He walked to the center of the ballroom and raised his hand for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice carried clearly through the vast space, "I thank you for attending this evening. Before we begin the festivities celebrating Miss Charlotte Whitmore's debut, I have something to say regarding her aunt, Lady Eleanor Whitmore." The room held its collective breath. Lady Eleanor, a woman of impeccable character and unblemished honor, has been the victim of a malicious forgery. Letters allegedly written by her to my late uncle are fabrications, clever ones, but fabrications nonetheless. I have engaged experts who will prove this conclusively. Shocked murmurs rippled through the crowd. "I am working to expose the perpetrator of this crime," Alexander continued, his voice hard as steel. "And I promise you this, anyone who repeats these lies, anyone who maligns Lady Eleanor's character, will answer to me personally. Am I understood?" Stunned silence. Dukes did not make public threats. Dukes did not defend compromised women. This was unprecedented. Lady Beatrice, sensing her moment, glided forward with practiced grace. "Your Grace, surely, you must see that you've been deceived. These letters—" "Lady Beatrice," Alexander's voice dropped several degrees, "you will not speak of Lady Eleanor in my presence again. Am I understood?" Beatrice stopped as if struck. "Your Grace, I only meant to—" I understood." "Yes, Your Grace," she whispered, her face burning with humiliation. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. He was supposed to abandon Eleanor, to turn to Beatrice for comfort. Instead, he'd publicly defended the spinster and cut Beatrice herself before all of society. She retreated to the edge of the ballroom, her mind racing. She'd miscalculated badly. In the library, Eleanor heard none of this. She sat in the gathering darkness, staring at nothing, when the door burst open. James stood there, a locked wooden box in his trembling hands. "Ellie," his voice was hoarse, "I need to tell you something I should have told you 18 years ago." He set the box on the desk, his hands shaking so badly he could barely manage the key. "I've been carrying this since the original scandal," James said. "Since Lord Ashworth's accusations. Mother made me swear never to speak of it, never to open it. She said, the family's reputation required your quiet acceptance of disgrace." Eleanor stood slowly. "James, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I've had proof of your innocence for 18 years. Tears streamed down his face. "And I was too young, too frightened of our mother, too weak to use it." He opened the box. Inside were papers, yellowed with age. Eleanor's hands trembled as she lifted them out. A signed confession from Lord Ashworth, written on his deathbed, admitting he'd attempted to assault her, that he'd lied to protect his reputation. Letters from witnesses who'd seen her fleeing the garden with torn dress and tears. A journal from their mother's lady's maid, describing in detail what had really happened. The truth, all of it, hidden away for 18 years. "I failed you," James choked out. "I was 24, terrified of Mother's wrath, desperate to believe that staying silent was protecting the family. But I failed you, Ellie. For 18 years, you've suffered, and I could have stopped it." Eleanor couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Proof had existed all along. Her mother had known the truth and forced her to live in disgrace anyway. The betrayal was so complete it seemed to hollow her out from the inside. But then, slowly, realization dawned. This evidence didn't just prove the current letters were false, it vindicated her from the original scandal. Completely, entirely. After 18 years, she could finally clear her name. Eleanor looked at her brother, saw his anguish, his guilt, his desperate need for forgiveness, and she understood. He'd been barely more than a boy, trapped between an authoritarian mother and a sister he loved. They'd both been children trying to survive. She took his hand. "We were both children trying to survive our mother. I forgive you, James." He broke down then, sobbing against her shoulder like the frightened young man he'd once been. The library door opened. Alexander stood there, taking in the scene, the box, the papers, James's tears. "What's happened?" he asked quietly. James straightened, wiping his eyes. Without a word, he handed Alexander the box. Alexander read quickly, his expression transforming from confusion to fury to fierce, blazing joy. "This changes everything," he breathed. He looked at Eleanor, his eyes alight with something that looked remarkably like triumph. "This doesn't just prove the current forgery's false. This vindicates you from the original scandal. Eleanor, do you understand? We can clear your name, completely." Eleanor's knees went weak. Alexander crossed to her immediately, steadying her. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice hard with determination, "the House of Lords will witness something unprecedented. And Eleanor Whitmore, you will finally receive the justice that is 18 years overdue." Eleanor barely slept. She lay in the guest chamber at Ashbourne House, staring at the canopy above her bed as Alexander's plan ran through her mind in endless loops. A formal hearing before the House of Lords, public presentation of evidence, and then most terrifying of all, a public proposal of marriage. "If this fails," she'd said to him late the previous night, "I'll be destroyed beyond any hope of recovery. And your reputation, Alexander, your standing, will be perfectly intact," he'd said firmly, taking her hands in his. "Because this will not fail. Eleanor, I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Trust me." Trust. Such a small word for such an enormous leap of faith. A soft knock at dawn brought Alexander's sister, Lady Margaret Hartfield, who had arrived from the country overnight at her brother's urgent summons. She swept into the room with the confident air of a woman who had long ago stopped caring what society thought of her. "My dear Eleanor," Margaret said warmly, "Alexander has told me everything, and I insist you must wear the Ashbourne sapphires today." Eleanor's eyes widened as Margaret opened a velvet case to reveal a magnificent necklace and matching earrings, sapphires the color of midnight, surrounded by diamonds. "I couldn't possibly." "You absolutely must," Margaret said firmly. "The sapphires are worn by the Duchess of Ashbourne on occasions of great significance. When Alexander presents you before the Lords, society must see that he has already claimed you as his own. The jewels are a public declaration." Eleanor's hands trembled as Margaret fastened the heavy necklace around her throat. In the mirror, she looked like someone else entirely regal, important, worthy of a duke's devotion, if only she could believe it. The House of Lords chamber was packed to capacity. Every peer in London had received Alexander's summons, invoking the ancient right of a duke to call an emergency session on matters of honor. The public gallery was filled with selected members of society, those whose opinions shaped London's social landscape. Eleanor entered the gallery between James and Margaret, her heart hammering so violently she thought it might break free of her chest. Every eye in the chamber tracked her movement. The Ashbourne sapphires glittered at her throat, unmistakable in their significance. Whispers rippled through the assembled crowd like wind through wheat. "What is the Duke planning? Why is she wearing the Ashbourne sapphires? This is unprecedented." Eleanor took her seat, gripping the railing so tightly her knuckles went white. 3 rows behind her, she glimpsed Lady Beatrice Caldwell, sitting with a small, satisfied smile on her perfect face. Beatrice clearly believed this was Alexander's public rejection of Eleanor, his formal declaration that the scandal had made any association impossible. Let her believe it, Eleanor thought grimly. Let her enjoy these last moments. Below, on the floor of the Lords, Alexander stood. He wore formal parliamentary robes, his dark hair swept back, his expression austere and commanding. He looked every inch the powerful duke he was. "My lords," his voice carried clearly through the ancient chamber, "I invoke my right to address this assembly on a matter of honor concerning Lady Eleanor Whitmore." He gestured, and a servant brought forward the forged letters, displayed them for all to see. These documents have circulated through London, claiming to be correspondence between Lady Eleanor and my late uncle, the previous Duke of Ashbourne. They suggest an intimate relationship spanning 5 years. Murmurs of disapproval rippled through the chamber. Several lords shook their heads, their expressions condemning. "I am here today," Alexander continued, "to prove these letters are forgeries and to address a graver injustice committed against Lady Eleanor 18 years ago." Eleanor's breath caught. She'd known he would defend her from the current scandal, but she hadn't realized he planned to resurrect the original accusations publicly, to expose everything. "I call my first witness," Alexander said, "Mr. Thomas Pembroke, expert in document authentication." The handwriting expert took his position, explained his credentials with calm authority, then proceeded to dismantle the letters methodically. "The ink formulation is inconsistent with the dates given," he testified. "This particular mixture was not available until 2 years ago. The paper bears a watermark from a manufacturer who only began operations last year. These letters could not possibly have been written when they claim." He produced a magnifying glass, showed the lords the inconsistencies in the handwriting, tiny variations that proved the hand was not Eleanor's, but someone copying hers with great skill. "Furthermore," the expert continued, "this letter dated the 15th of April, 1849, allegedly written from London, could not have been penned by Lady Eleanor. She was documented to be at the Whitmore country estate in Derbyshire that entire week. I have guest lists from a house party, testimony from servants, and a mention in the local newspaper's social column placing her there." Doubt began to creep across the faces of the assembled peers. Perhaps the letters were false after all. "But this is not the only injustice Lady Eleanor has suffered," Alexander said, his voice hardening. 18 years ago, when she was merely 19 years old, she was the victim of a vicious slander, one that destroyed her reputation and robbed her of the future she deserved." He held up a sheaf of aged papers. "This is the signed confession of Lord Ashworth, written on his deathbed 2 years after the incident that destroyed Lady Eleanor's good name." Alexander began to read, his voice clear and deliberate. "I, Edmund Ashworth, being of sound mind and facing my eternal judgment, do confess that I attempted to force myself upon Lady Eleanor Whitmore in the summer of 1833. She fought me off with admirable strength and fled. To protect my reputation and marriage, I claimed she had attempted to seduce me. This was a lie. Lady Eleanor was entirely innocent. I have carried this guilt for 19 years, and I pray she can forgive me, though I have no right to ask it." Shocked silence filled the chamber. Eleanor gripped the railing, tears streaming down her face. To hear those words read aloud, to have the truth spoken in this place of power, it was almost too much to bear. "I also have testimony," Alexander continued, "from 3 witnesses who saw Lord Ashworth emerge from the garden that day dishevelled, furious, his cravat torn, who saw Lady Eleanor minutes later with her dress torn, her face bruised, weeping, who heard Ashworth threaten that if she spoke against him, he would destroy her." He read the witness statements one by one, each account corroborating the others, painting a picture of a young woman assaulted and then slandered by a powerful man who knew society would believe him over her. The chamber erupted. "This is an outrage. That poor girl. We believed Ashworth's lies." In the gallery, several women wept openly. Some of the lords looked ashamed they had been part of that society, had believed those lies, had turned their backs on an innocent young woman. One elderly peer, Lord Fitzwilliam, who had been a close friend of Ashworth's, stood abruptly. "This is conjecture and hearsay. Ashworth is dead and cannot defend himself. I will not see his memory slandered." Alexander's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. "My lord, are you calling me a liar?" The temperature seemed to drop. Every person in the room understood what Alexander was really asking. "Are you prepared to face me personally on this matter?" It was a veiled challenge to a duel, and no one challenged a Duke of Ashbourne on a matter of honor. Lord Fitzwilliam's face went white. He sat down abruptly. "No, Your Grace, I meant no offense." "Then let there be no further dispute," Alexander said coldly. He turned, and his eyes found Eleanor in the gallery. His expression softened, transformed from ice to warmth in an instant. "Lady Eleanor Whitmore has endured 18 years of undeserved scorn," he said, his voice gentle now. "I will not allow one more day of it. This chamber has witnessed her complete vindication. Now witness my devotion." He looked directly at her. "Lady Eleanor, will you stand?" Eleanor's heart stopped. Beside her, James squeezed her hand, and Margaret gave her an encouraging nod. On trembling legs, Eleanor rose, supported by their steady presence, every eye in the chamber fixed on her. She stood in the gallery wearing the Ashbourne sapphires, tears streaming down her face, and waited for Alexander to speak. "Eleanor," he said, and his voice carried clearly through the hushed chamber, "you are the finest woman I have ever known, brilliant in your mind, resilient in your spirit, dignified in the face of cruelty that would have broken lesser souls. Will you consent to be my wife, my Duchess, my partner in all things?" The chamber held its collective breath. This had never happened. A duke proposing marriage in the House of Lords itself. Eleanor's voice emerged clear despite her tears. "Yes, 1,000 times, yes." Half the chamber erupted in shocked disapproval. This was improper, irregular, unprecedented. Half erupted in reluctant admiration. What a gesture! What devotion! The gallery exploded in whispers that rose to a roar. Alexander's voice cut through the chaos. "Let it be recorded in the official minutes of this session that any insult to my future Duchess is an insult to the Crown itself, to this house, and to me personally." Then he did something that shocked even those who thought they could no longer be surprised. He left the floor of the Lords, climbed the stairs to the public gallery, breaking every protocol, and took Eleanor's hand in his. He kissed her hand before everyone, a restrained but deliberate gesture, a public claiming that could not be misunderstood. The Duke of Ashbourne and his vindicated bride to be stood together as equals, while London's entire power structure watched in stunned silence. "Your Grace," one of Alexander's men appeared at his elbow. "We have additional information regarding the forged letters." Alexander nodded. "Bring in the witness." A terrified lady's maid was escorted into the chamber. She stood trembling on the floor of the Lords, her eyes darting around the imposing space. "Tell them," Alexander said, not unkindly, "tell them what you told my investigators." "Lady Beatrice Caldwell hired me to forge the letters," the maid said, her voice shaking. "She gave me a sample of Lady Eleanor's handwriting, stolen from a charitable committee document. She paid a man to copy the writing, told him what to say in the letters. She said it had to be ready before Miss Charlotte's debut ball." Every head in the gallery turned toward Beatrice. She stood frozen, her face white as parchment, her perfect composure shattered, her scheme, her malicious plot, exposed before all of London. The whispers turned on her now, sharp and condemning. She tried to destroy Lady Eleanor. Out of jealousy. How utterly despicable. Beatrice's social death was instantaneous and complete. She fled the gallery, her sobs audible even as she ran. Alexander escorted Eleanor through the gauntlet of peers as they exited the chamber. Some bowed respectfully, acknowledging the future Duchess of Ashbourne. Others turned away in embarrassment, ashamed of the role they'd played in her persecution. In the privacy of Alexander's carriage, Eleanor finally allowed herself to break down. 18 years of pain, of holding herself together, of enduring it all, came pouring out in great, racking sobs. Alexander pulled her into his arms and held her as she wept, murmuring soft reassurances, stroking her hair. "Never again," he promised fiercely. "Never again will anyone make you feel less than you are. You are extraordinary, Eleanor, my Duchess, my love, and I will spend the rest of my life making certain you never doubt your worth again." As the carriage rolled toward Ashbourne House through streets already buzzing with news of the extraordinary session, Eleanor realized she was no longer society's cautionary tale. She was the Duke of Ashbourne's chosen bride, vindicated and valued and loved, and her story was finally her own to write. London exploded with gossip the moment news spread from the House of Lords. The same scandal sheets that had gleefully printed the forged letters now fell over themselves, printing retractions and apologies. Lady Eleanor Whitmore vindicated. Duke exposes 18-year injustice. The headlines grew more dramatic by the hour, each paper trying to outdo the others in their suddenly fervent defense of Eleanor's character. Families who had shunned Eleanor for years now desperately sought audiences with the future Duchess of Ashbourne. Flowers arrived by the cartload at Ashbourne House. Invitations poured in. Apology letters written on the finest stationery expressed shock and dismay that anyone could have believed such terrible lies. Eleanor received none of them for the first week. She remained sequestered at Ashbourne House, processing 18 years of vindication. The truth had set her free, but freedom after so long in chains required adjustment. She walked the gardens, sat in the library with Byron purring in her lap, and slowly, very slowly began to believe that this was real. Lady Beatrice Caldwell's fate was swift and merciless. Her father, the Earl of Thornbury, disowned her publicly in a statement printed in every major newspaper. Asterisk. The Earl wishes it known that his daughter's actions were undertaken without his knowledge or consent, and that she no longer represents the Caldwell family name. Asterisk. Beatrice was sent to a remote estate in the Scottish Highlands, barred from London society indefinitely. Some whispered she would never be allowed to return. "Do you want to press charges?" Alexander asked Eleanor one afternoon as they walked through the Ashbourne House gardens. "We have evidence of her crime. She could face prosecution." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, considering. Part of her, the part that had suffered for so long, wanted justice, wanted Beatrice to face legal consequences for what she'd done. But a larger part simply wanted peace. "She's already destroyed," Eleanor said finally. "Her reputation is ruined, her family has cast her out, and she'll live in exile for the future. I won't add to that. I won't become her someone who inflicts pain because pain was inflicted on me." Alexander studied her face, then lifted her hand to kiss her knuckles. "You are extraordinary. You know that?" "I'm tired," Eleanor said honestly. "Tired of anger, of bitterness, of carrying the weight of other people's cruelty. I just want to be happy now." "Then happy you shall be," Alexander promised. Society noted the contrast, Eleanor's grace versus Beatrice's malice. It became yet another reason to praise the future Duchess and condemn the disgraced lady. 3 days before the wedding, Eleanor went alone to visit her mother's grave. The cemetery was quiet in the morning light, birdsong the only sound among the marble monuments. Eleanor stood before the headstone times, Lady Catherine Whitmore, beloved wife, and mother times, and felt the complicated tangle of emotions she always experienced here. Love, anger, grief, betrayal. "I'm getting married, Mother," Eleanor said aloud to the stone. "To the Duke of Ashbourne, Alexander. He's a good man, brilliant and kind and strong. He fought for me when I'd stopped fighting for myself." The grave offered no response, of course, but Eleanor continued anyway. "I've been vindicated. The whole truth came out about Lord Ashworth, about what really happened. James had the evidence all along. You made him hide it, made him swear to protect the family name instead of protecting me." Her voice cracked slightly. "I was so angry at you for so long, but I'm choosing to forgive you now. Not because you deserve it, you don't, not really, but because I deserve peace, and I can't have peace while carrying this anger." She knelt and placed white roses, Alexander's signature, at the base of the headstone. "I hope you would have been proud of who I became. I hope you would have been happy for me now. But even if you wouldn't have been, I'm happy. And that has to be enough." Eleanor walked away feeling lighter, as if she'd set down a burden she'd been carrying for far too long. The past no longer owned her. She was free. The wedding would take place at Westminster Abbey, Alexander had insisted. "Your wedding will be a public celebration," he'd said firmly when Eleanor suggested something smaller. "After years of public scorn, London will witness your triumph." Eleanor personally selected every name for the guest list. Those who had been kind during her years of exile, the few friends who hadn't abandoned her, the servants who'd treated her with genuine respect, the families who'd never whispered cruel gossip, all received prominent placement. Those who had been cruel received no invitation at all. Lady Hartwell, who had called Eleanor a wilted flower, found herself pointedly excluded. Her husband, a rising politician, lost a valuable connection to the Duke of Ashbourne's political influence. The snub was noted by everyone. Charlotte burst into Eleanor's sitting room one afternoon, her face glowing with excitement. "Aunt Eleanor, my debut ball was a success," Lady Pemberton said. I was the most graceful dancer she'd seen in years, and Lord Ashford's son has already asked Papa if he might call on me. Eleanor laughed, pulling her niece into an embrace. I'm so relieved, darling. I was worried the scandal would overshadow your evening. Are you joking? Alexander's defense of you made me the most interesting debutante of the season. Everyone wanted to meet the niece of the future Duchess of Ashbourne. Charlotte's expression turned serious. Aunt Eleanor, would you allow me to be your maid of honor? I know I'm young, but it would mean everything to me. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Oh, Charlotte, nothing would make me happier. They went shopping together on Bond Street, and Eleanor experienced the strange sensation of being treated with reverence rather than pity. Shopkeepers bowed and scraped, offered their finest goods, competed for the honor of serving the future Duchess. It's rather overwhelming, Eleanor confessed to Charlotte. It's what you deserve, Charlotte said firmly. Finally, Lady Margaret Hartfield had become an unexpected friend and ally. Alexander's widowed sister had been just 42, but she'd refused all pressure to remarry after her husband's death, choosing independence over security. I see in you a kindred spirit, Margaret told Eleanor over tea one afternoon. Another woman who refused to be diminished by society's expectations. You chose independence, Eleanor said. I had it thrust upon me. Did you? Or did you choose dignity over desperation? You could have accepted any number of unsuitable offers over the years, I'm sure. Men looking for a housekeeper or a nursemaid for their children, you refused to settle. Eleanor had never thought of it that way. I suppose I did. My brother has been lonely his entire adult life, Margaret confided. Oh, he's surrounded by people, of course, but truly lonely. You're the first woman who's made him genuinely happy. When he speaks of you, his whole face transforms. Eleanor's chest tightened with emotion. He's given me back myself. You've given him a future worth having, Margaret replied. The wedding dress was a masterpiece of elegant simplicity, ivory silk with delicate lace overlay, cut to flatter Eleanor's figure rather than hide it. The off-shoulder design showed her graceful neck and shoulders to advantage. It was the dress of a woman, not a girl sophisticated and beautiful. Eleanor chose to wear her mother's pearls. It was a complicated choice, laden with meaning, but they represented her family legacy, her history, the woman she'd become despite everything. At the final fitting, as the modiste pinned the hem, Eleanor studied her reflection in the mirror. She looked radiant, confident, transformed not into someone else, but into the fullest version of herself. The modiste, an elderly Frenchwoman who had served Eleanor's mother years ago, wiped away tears. Lady Eleanor, she said softly, you look as your mother should have seen you, triumphant. The apology parade began in earnest the week before the wedding. Former acquaintances called at Ashbourne House, offering awkward explanations and desperate regrets. Eleanor received them with perfect courtesy, accepted their apologies with grace, but did not forget. Lady Pemberton arrived with an enormous bouquet and profuse regrets about her comment at the Pemberton ball. My dear Lady Eleanor, I cannot express how deeply I regret any offence I may have caused. I was simply surprised by the Duke's attentions. I meant nothing unkind, I assure you. I appreciate your kind words, Lady Pemberton, Eleanor said evenly. I hope society learns to be kinder to women in vulnerable positions. We all deserve that consideration. Lady Pemberton left, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Eleanor's forgiveness was somehow more damning than anger would have been. Each apology forced these women to confront their own cruelty. The night before the wedding, Whitmore House hosted an intimate family dinner. James stood with a glass of wine, his eyes bright with emotion. To my sister Eleanor, who survived what would have destroyed lesser souls, who maintained grace when others showed only cruelty, and who now claims the happiness she always deserved. After dinner, James drew Eleanor aside and presented her with a leather-bound journal. Father's private writings, he said. I found these passages about you. I thought you should have them. Eleanor opened the journal with trembling hands and read her father's words. Asterisk, my daughter Eleanor possesses a strength of character that humbles me. Despite the injustice done to her, she maintains her dignity and grace. I am certain of her innocence, and I am proud beyond measure of the woman she is becoming. Asterisk. He believed me, Eleanor whispered. Always, James said. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to follow his example sooner. You're brave now, Eleanor said, embracing her brother. That's what matters. That same evening, Alexander requested a brief, chaperoned meeting with Eleanor. They sat across from each other at the drawing-room table, Margaret reading discreetly in the corner to maintain propriety. Alexander reached across and took Eleanor's hands. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly. "I'm afraid." Eleanor's eyes widened. "Of what?" "That I'm not worthy of your strength. That my love feels inadequate compared to everything you've endured. That I can't possibly give you enough to make up for 18 years of pain." Eleanor's heart cracked open. "Alexander, you gave me back myself. You fought for me when I'd stopped fighting. You made me believe I was worth defending. You are everything." Their fingers intertwined across the table, promises and devotion flowing between them without words. At White's Gentlemen's Club, Alexander's friends hosted a traditional bachelor's evening. The wine flowed freely, the conversation grew loud and ribald, and then Lord Kenmore, deep in his cups, made a catastrophic mistake. "Sentimental of you, Ashbourne, marrying used goods out of pity." Alexander stood with such sudden violence that his chair toppled backward. The entire room fell silent. "Step outside with me, Kenmore," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "Now." Kenmore went pale, suddenly and brutally sober. "Your Grace, I apologize, I didn't mean—" "Now." "I most humbly beg your pardon," Kenmore stammered. "The wine spoke, not me. I meant no disrespect to your future Duchess." "Eleanor is a Duchess now in all but name," Alexander said coldly. "Insult her again, and your title won't protect you. Am I understood?" "Perfectly, Your Grace." No one else dared speak ill of Eleanor that evening. Back at Ashbourne House, Eleanor hosted her own gathering, Margaret and Charlotte joining her for tea and quiet conversation. "I never thought this day would come," Eleanor admitted. "I'd accepted spinsterhood as my permanent state. I'd made peace with it." "You were never truly a spinster," Margaret said wisely. "You were a woman waiting for a man worthy of you. Most women settle for what's available. You waited for extraordinary." Eleanor confessed her wedding night fears she was nearly 40, entirely inexperienced, uncertain of what was expected. Margaret, worldly and kind, took her hand. "Love matters more than experience, my dear, and Alexander adores you. He'll be patient, gentle, attentive to your needs. Trust him. Trust yourself." At midnight, Eleanor stood alone at her window, looking out over London's glittering lights. She thought of 19-year-old Eleanor, devastated and broken by scandal. If she could speak to that girl across the years, she would say, "Asterisk, survive. It will be worth it. You will be worth it." Asterisk. A single white rose sat in a vase on her nightstand, the last unmarried rose. Tomorrow, she would become a duchess. Tomorrow, everything would change. Eleanor woke to sunlight streaming through her windows. No rain, a perfect June morning for a wedding. Her room filled with women, Margaret, Charlotte, ladies' maids, the hairdresser. They moved around her with practiced efficiency, transforming her from woman to bride. The ivory silk gown slipped over her shoulders like water. Her hair was arranged partially up, with soft curls cascading down her back. The Ashbourne sapphires were placed at her throat, their weight both literal and symbolic. Eleanor watched her reflection transform in the mirror and realized something profound. She wasn't being made into someone else. She was becoming fully herself, the woman she always should have been allowed to be. "You're ready," Margaret said softly. Eleanor descended the stairs to the waiting carriage, her heart full to bursting. She carried no regret, no bitterness, only joy, hope, and the quiet certainty that her story was finally reaching its proper chapter. The beginning. The Ashbourne state carriage was a masterpiece of ducal splendor, polished black lacquer gleaming in the morning sun, the family crest emblazoned in gold on the doors, footmen in immaculate livery standing at attention. Eleanor sat beside James, her ivory silk gown spread carefully around her, the Ashbourne sapphires heavy and magnificent at her throat. "Are you ready?" James asked, his voice thick with emotion. Eleanor took a deep breath. "I am." The carriage rolled forward, and Eleanor's heart caught as she saw the crowds lining the streets. London had turned out in force to witness this wedding, the scandal, the vindication, the fairy tale ending that no one had seen coming. Some faces were hostile, still skeptical or resentful, but most cheered as the carriage passed, waving handkerchiefs and calling out blessings. Women in particular pressed forward, their expressions hopeful and admiring. "You give us hope, my lady," a young woman called out, her voice carrying clearly above the crowd. Eleanor turned toward the voice, found the woman's eyes, and waved. The gesture was small but deliberate acknowledgement, solidarity, promise. The woman's face lit up with joy. James covered Eleanor's hand with his own. Father would be so proud, Ellie. Mother too, if she'd allowed herself to see clearly. Eleanor squeezed his hand, unable to speak past the emotion clogging her throat. Westminster Abbey rose before them, magnificent and ancient, its Gothic spires reaching toward the heavens. The entrance was festooned with flowers, thousands upon thousands of white roses cascading down the stone columns, filling the air with their delicate perfume. Alexander's signature tribute, magnified to spectacular proportions. Inside, every important family in England had gathered. Absence from this wedding would be noted, remarked upon, remembered. It would constitute social suicide. Eleanor noticed immediately who was not present. Lady Hartwell had been excluded entirely. Her husband had protested, but Alexander had been immovable. The cuts were deliberate, the exclusions meaningful. Those who had been cruelest to Eleanor found themselves on the outside looking in. Eleanor paused at the Abbey doors, her hand on James's arm. The magnitude of the moment threatened to overwhelm her. Through those doors lay her future, her vindication, her new life. She drew a deep breath and stepped forward. The interior of the Abbey was breathtaking. Candlelight flickered from hundreds of candles, casting golden light across ancient stone. The congregation rose as one when Eleanor appeared, a rustling wave of silk and speculation. Eleanor walked down the aisle on James's arm, her head held high. Every eye was upon her, but the quality of their stares had changed. They no longer saw a scandal or a cautionary tale. They saw a duchess. She passed former tormentors, who were now forced to bow their heads respectfully. Former friends who had abandoned her watched with expressions of regret and shame. Society's elite bore witness to what they had tried to prevent, Eleanor Whitmore, claiming her rightful place among them. And then her eyes found Alexander at the altar, and everyone else simply faded away. He stood tall and commanding in formal dress, but his austere expression had transformed into something that stole Eleanor's breath. Pure joy radiated from his face, wonder, love so profound it seemed to fill the entire abbey. As James placed Eleanor's hand in Alexander's, the Duke leaned close and whispered for her ears alone. "You are radiant. I am happy," Eleanor whispered back, and she realized with sudden clarity that happiness, not vindication, not revenge, but this simple, genuine joy, was her true triumph. The Archbishop of Canterbury began the ceremony, his voice resonant with authority. The traditional vows were spoken, ancient words binding them together before God and society. When prompted to take Eleanor as his wife, Alexander's voice rang clear. "I do." Then he added, unauthorized and unexpected, "I pledge to defend your honor as fiercely as I treasure your heart." Shocked murmurs rippled through the congregation. One did not deviate from the prescribed ceremony, but Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, and when her turn came, she met Alexander's gaze steadily. "I do," she said firmly. "I pledge to stand beside you, never behind you, as your equal." The murmurs grew louder. Both bride and groom were declaring publicly that this marriage would be a partnership radical for an era when wives were expected to be subordinate. Alexander's smile was brilliant. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the Archbishop intoned. Alexander cupped Eleanor's face gently in his hands and kissed her. Not the chaste brush of lips expected at a formal wedding, but a real kiss, restrained yet passionate, tender yet possessive. It lingered longer than strictly proper, and Eleanor felt herself melt into it, felt 18 years of loneliness dissolve in that single perfect moment. He was claiming her before all of London, and she was claiming him right back. Gasps echoed through the Abbey, followed by whispers, but also surprisingly scattered applause from younger attendees who found the display romantic rather than scandalous. Alexander and Eleanor turned to face the congregation as Duke and Duchess of Ashbourne. The recessional was Eleanor's victory walk. She no longer hunched her shoulders or tried to make herself small. She walked as an equal to the Duke at her side, her head high, her bearing regal. The transformation was visible to everyone who watched. Former tormentors were forced to curtsy and bow to the new Duchess. Eleanor acknowledged each with polite nods, her expression serene and untouchable. When they passed a stiff-faced woman near the back, Lady Hartwell, present only because her husband had insisted on attending. Despite the exclusion, Eleanor's gaze passed over her without the slightest acknowledgement. Every step down that aisle was a repudiation of 18 years of scorn. The reception at Ashbourne House was magnificent. The grand ballroom had been transformed into an elegant wonderland of white and gold. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, White roses filled every surface, and champagne flowed freely. The cream of society gathered to celebrate, or at least to be seen celebrating. In the receiving line, Alexander kept his hand at the small of Eleanor's back, constantly a possessive touch that communicated ownership and devotion in equal measure. When it came time for toasts, Alexander raised his glass, and his voice carried clearly through the ballroom. "To my bride, who has shown me that true nobility lies not in birth or title, but in character and courage." Eleanor surprised everyone by raising her own glass in response. "To my husband, who taught me that some men are worth waiting for, even if the wait is nearly 40 years. Laughter and applause filled the room. The Duchess of Ashbourne had wit to match her newfound status. The first dance was a waltz, just as it had been at the Pemberton ball where they'd first met. "Do you remember?" Alexander asked as they moved across the floor. "Every moment," Eleanor replied. "I was terrified and confused and certain you were playing some cruel jest." "I knew then I would marry you," he said, his grey eyes intent on hers. "I simply had to convince you. I was falling in love that first night," Eleanor confessed, "but I couldn't let myself believe it was real." Alexander drew her fractionally closer. "Believe it now." He danced 3 waltzes in succession with Eleanor alone, breaking every rule of etiquette but establishing beyond doubt his devotion to his new duchess. The speeches began. James stood, emotional but steady. 18 years ago, I failed to defend my sister when she needed me most. I will carry that regret always. But today, I celebrate the man who was brave enough to be what I should have been, her champion, her defender, her partner. Alexander, thank you for being the man Eleanor always deserved." Lady Margaret stood next. The Hartfield women are known for being formidable, independent, and utterly unwilling to compromise who we are for society's approval. Today, I welcome another such woman into our family. Eleanor, you are already the sister of my heart. Charlotte's speech brought tears to many eyes. My Aunt Eleanor taught me that a woman's worth isn't measured by marriage or society's approval, but by her own character. She survived injustice with grace, endured cruelty with dignity, and emerged stronger than those who tried to break her. She is my role model, my inspiration, and my dearest friend. Then Alexander stood again and made an announcement that stunned the gathering. My Duchess has decided to establish the Lady Eleanor Whitmore Foundation for wrongly accused women. It will provide legal defense, safe haven, and social support for women facing false accusations. I am donating £10,000 annually to fund this endeavor, and I invite others to join me in this worthy cause. The ballroom erupted in whispers. Eleanor was transforming her pain into purpose, her suffering into salvation for others. Families scrambled to pledge their support, not wanting to be seen as opposing such a noble venture. Lady Pemberton approached with an elaborately wrapped gift, her smile tremulous and uncertain. "Your Grace, I wanted to personally apologize for that. I never meant to. Please accept this token of my deepest regret." Eleanor accepted the gift with cool courtesy. "Thank you for the gift, Lady Pemberton. I hope in future you extend kindness to all women, not just duchesses." The words were polite but cutting. Eleanor had not forgotten, though she'd chosen to rise above. Lady Pemberton retreated, her discomfort palpable. Later, Alexander led Eleanor away from the crowd to the conservatory. The glass-enclosed space was filled with roses, and Eleanor gasped as she recognized specific varieties. "These are from my garden," she whispered, moving among the familiar blooms. "I had your entire collection moved here," Alexander said. "Your roses belong wherever you are, and you belong here, with me." Eleanor turned to him, tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. She laughed and cried simultaneously, overwhelmed by the magnitude of everything that had changed. Alexander pulled her into his arms and simply held her while she felt everything she'd been holding back for weeks. As the afternoon faded toward evening, Alexander and Eleanor prepared to depart for their honeymoon at the Ashbourne country estate. The state carriage had been decorated with white roses, the ducal crest gleaming proudly. Guests gathered to see them off, throwing rose petals that filled the air like fragrant snow. Eleanor turned and threw her bouquet directly to Charlotte, who caught it with a squeal of delight. The gesture was deliberate, passing forward the hope that love and vindication were possible, that happy endings existed even for those who had suffered. The carriage rolled away to cheers and applause, carrying the Duke and Duchess of Ashbourne toward their future. 6 months later. The Vindication Ball at Ashbourne House was the event of the season. Eleanor had personally selected every invitation, rewarding loyalty and excluding cruelty with deliberate precision. The guest list itself was a statement about who mattered in the new social order she was quietly creating. The Duke and Duchess descended the grand staircase together, and a hush fell over the assembled guests. Eleanor wore burgundy silk that complemented her complexion beautifully, the Ashbourne rubies at her throat and wrists. Her hair was styled with confident elegance, and she moved with the assured grace of a woman who knew exactly who she was. Before the dancing began, Eleanor addressed the assembly. "I thank those who stood by me in my darkest hours," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Your loyalty will never be forgotten. To those who did not, I hope my example teaches your daughters that a woman's worth is not determined by age or gossip, but by character and courage." Applause filled the ballroom. Eleanor had become more than a duchess, she had become a symbol. Late that night, after the last guest had departed, Eleanor and Alexander stood at the window of their private chambers, looking out over London's glittering lights. "Do you ever regret the years you waited?" Alexander asked quietly, his arms around her from behind. Eleanor leaned back against his chest, contemplating the question. "Not one moment," she said finally. "The waiting taught me my worth, the struggle taught me my strength, and you taught me that real love doesn't see age, it sees souls." "They said you were too old," Alexander murmured against her hair. Eleanor smiled, turning in his arms to face him. "I was exactly the right age, old enough to know my worth, brave enough to demand it, and wise enough to recognize real love when it fought for me." Alexander kissed her then, tender and thorough, and Eleanor thought of 19-year-old Eleanor, broken and devastated. She sent a silent message across the years. It was worth it. Every moment of pain, every year of struggle, it led to this. To him, to happiness. They stood together at the window, silhouetted against the London skyline, the Duke of Ashbourne and his Duchess, equal partners in a marriage built on respect, passion, and hard-won triumph. They had proven that true love and justice could prevail over society's cruelest judgments, that it was never, ever too late for a woman to reclaim her story, rewrite her ending, and claim the happiness that had always been her birthright. Eleanor was no longer society's cautionary tale. She was the Duchess of Ashbourne, beloved wife, champion of the wrongly accused, and living proof that the best revenge is a life magnificently lived. Thank you so much for joining Eleanor and Alexander on their incredible journey from mockery to triumph, from loneliness to love. If Eleanor's story touched your heart, please show your support by hitting that like button. It truly helps this channel grow and allows us to bring you more inspiring stories of courage, redemption, and love that defies all odds. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss our next tale of resilience and romance. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. What was your favorite moment in Eleanor's story? Which scene moved you to tears? Do you believe it's never too old to find true love? Share your thoughts. I read every single comment and love connecting with you. If you loved this story, check out these recommendations next. Thank you for being part of this beautiful community where we celebrate stories of women who refuse to be diminished, who reclaim their power, and who prove that the best chapters of life can come when we least expect them. Remember, your worth is not determined by age, by society's opinions, or by past pain. You are never too old, never too late, never too anything to claim the happiness you deserve. Until our next story, stay strong, stay hopeful, and never stop believing in second chances. With love, Lyra's Romance Stories, because every woman deserves her happily ever after.